Good evening, everybody. My name is Wayne Ranney, and I serve on the board of directors for the Grand Canyon Historical Society. And we welcome you to tonight's virtual outing. The Grand Canyon Historical Society, our mission is to celebrate and promote the study and preservation of the Grand Canyon region's cultural and natural history for the education and enjoyment of its members and the public. And just last year in 2024, we celebrated 40 years of existence when the society was started by some pioneer members of Grand Canyon Village. We encourage you to become a member. Our dues are only $35 a year. We are an all-volunteer organization, and we're hopeful that many of you can join us so that we can continue to expand all of our activities like these virtual outings and in-person outings and our tri-annual history symposiums. If you do become a member, you'll get 4 issues in the calendar year of the Old Pioneer magazine, which has a lot of history articles about the Grand Canyon and the Grand Canyon region. So we do these virtual outings. We conduct tours at the South and North Rim, and you can find it on our website. Our website is very easy, grandcanyonhistory.org.
I want to read a brief bio here of Dr. Schnur. His father and mother here in this photograph on the far right and left moved to Grand Canyon Village in 1948. At that time, Paul was in the 7th grade. And Grand Canyon had no school after the 8th grade. So if you wanted to keep going to school, you had to leave. And Paul was sent to the Wasatch Academy in Utah for high school. And when he wasn't in high school during the summer and during breaks, he would be right back to Grand Canyon with his folks. And that was a tradition that happened all the way up through college for him. Paul followed in his father's footsteps and is a retired surgeon, an associate professor at the Mayo Medical School. He's the past president of the American Society of Plastic Surgeons. He graduated from the University of Arizona and Baylor Medical College, completed his residency at the Mayo Clinic.
Whenever I tell acquaintances that I grew up at the Grand Canyon, they say, I didn't know anybody ever lived at the Grand Canyon. Where did you live, in the bottom? And this just happened to me last week when we were having dinner with a new acquaintance. We tell people, well, there's a Grand Canyon Village. That's where we live. And they said, well, I thought that was just hotels. And I have to answer that, yes, it is hotels, but there are other people who live there to support it. It's a very unique place to live, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how unique it is and some of the special nuances of living in a small town like Grand Canyon Village. Now, I'm going to try to share with you how we got to Grand Canyon and what brought us there, and a little bit of details, because it was obviously my father that we followed, and he played an important part. So we're going to start with a little bit about his story and then transition into our story. As you'll see on the screen, a newspaper article written in 1937 in a Vermont newspaper said, and as you can see the newspaper clipping, it said, First Lieutenant Leo Schnur, medical resident, has gone west to look after the health of the noble red men. And notice how they spell Navajo. It says that he received this through the civil service as an appointment to the medical service with the Department of Interior, and was assigned from Vermont to Window Rock, Arizona. The reservation of the haughty Navajo tribe. Dr. Schnur left on Thursday at a stopover in Brooklyn, New York, which was his hometown, and he'll proceed on with his wife and boy, Paul Leo. So I'm the boy, where he will arrive at the reservation. So here we were back in 1937 in Vermont and New Hampshire, shortly after I was born. And you will see that the car that they were in was sort of not a modern, convenient car. It was actually a rumble seat 2-door, and we drove from Stowe, Vermont to Arizona in this car, obviously not on super highways, but we drove Highway 66 a good part of the way. Okay. Now, this is the Navajo and Hopi Reservation. You can see the map up in the top right. I'm going to get a, hold on, I'm going to get a laser. Let's see, I'm going to get a laser pointer. Can you see that laser pointer? Tom? Okay, well, I assume you see it, but you'll see up here where the
Yes.
reservation is. Most all of you know where it is. This is the Navajo Reservation. This is the Hopi Reservation. And as it said in that newspaper article, the first place we lived was in Window Rock, Arizona. And then when I follow the logs, we moved then to Fort Wingate, and we're then transferred to Luke, which is right near Flagstaff, and ultimately to Tuba City, which was the major hospital for the Navajo Reservation. And here is the Tuba City Hospital in 1940. And my sister Sally, who's here beside me, was born there, probably one of the few, if not the only white person born in the Indian hospital. She has her birth certificate, which is kind of interesting because they have to sort of accommodate that she was not Indian in her birth certificate. So Leo then after Tuba City, the World War II came along and he was inducted into World War II. But before he was assigned to build the hospital in Poston for the Japanese relocation camp. And that Poston Japanese relocation camp is right on the Colorado River. And if you can see from the map, there's a Gila River one, and later on he was involved with the Gila River one, and I actually went with him to make rounds there. But this is a picture from the Library of Congress with him taking care of a patient, and this is a Japanese doctor who he trained. And I couldn't figure out why he did that. And then I found out that the Indians basically ran the Japanese concentration camps because they were all on Indian property. They tried to prevent President Roosevelt from putting them on Indian property, but he said, no way, we're going to put them there. So the Indians said, well, we're not going to let you treat the Japanese the way you treated us. So what we're going to do is to run the camps, and they did. And that's how Leo came to set that camp up. Well, then I won't go into World War II, the time he spent in World War II. And then when he got out, he rejoined the Indian Service and was assigned to Sackatoon, Arizona, the Pima Reservation, which was a little warmer than the Navajo Reservation, but at least it was in Arizona. And during that time, he discovered Sedona and Oak Creek Canyon, which was not easy to do in those days because there was no highway and there was no Interstate 17. But he bought property from the homesteader, and he built this house that you see here called Bedside Manor, that he named after what he thought was the most important attribute of a physician. He bought the first station wagon that came into Arizona after World War II, a Ford Woody station wagon that had a Roadrunner painted on the side of it. Here's a replica that I have of the old station wagon.
The house we're sitting in.
Yeah, okay, and so Sally says, we're sitting in the living room of this house right now. It looks a little different now than it did then. So while he was at Sackatoon, the Indian Service, in its infinite wisdom, reassigned him to North Dakota, Fort Yates, North Dakota in the 1940s. And if you can imagine North Dakota in the 1940s, I'm not sure how many paved roads there were. In fact, if you left the town of Fort Yates, you had to tell the operator you were leaving, and where you were going, you had to call the operator and tell you got there, or they'd send out the highway patrol looking for you. And so they weren't real happy. Actually, Dad and I kind of liked it there because we could hunt and fish anytime we wanted, but Mom and Sally thought it was too cold and they wanted to find a way to get back to Arizona. So when I was doing some research, mainly on healthcare in the Verde Valley, I was in Prescott in the Charlotte Hall Museum there, and I came across this letter called Mile High Docs. And it was written by Dr. Phillips, who practiced his life in Prescott. And in reading the first chapter, it said that he had finished his residency, had finished 2 years in the military, and he had seen that they were looking for a doctor at the Grand Canyon because the doctor who was there was leaving, and they had a hospital at Grand Canyon at the time. He traveled to Arizona, interviewed, was offered the position as medical director, and then they said, oh, by the way, if you have any animals, you can't have pets in the Grand Canyon. Well, his wife refused to give up her 2 dogs, so he turned the offer down. And so I'm assuming, although Leo never told me, that as soon as he turned it down, Leo saw the ad, he went down, he interviewed, he was accepted for the position. He knew that you couldn't have dogs, and they had 2 Irish setters. So the Irish setters were sent to live in Sedona with the people who were living here in the house. And here was our move from North Dakota to Grand Canyon. You'd see this was the 1940s version of U-Haul. Okay, now here's an aerial view of Grand Canyon Village. And some of you who are watching may be very familiar with Grand Canyon Village, and some of you who are watching may not be. But I want to point out a few things that are significant to us and to the story. This is where our home was. And it was in the Pinon Pines, and you can see a road coming next to it, which was called Navajo Drive, and it was going downhill. So this was the sledding center, which we'll probably tell you more about in a little bit. I think Sally's got a story to tell about that. This is the hospital. It's not the hospital today because there isn't a hospital there. Today it's the Grand Canyon Conservatory headquarters, and we've been there and visited it, and it's still much like it was when we were there. They just have reutilized the rooms. And there was a path between our home and the hospital. Okay, here's where the school was. And of course, we walked to school summer and winter through driving storms, always uphill. But you could see it was a walk to school, or we rode our bikes because everybody rode their bikes a lot. There's a gas station. This was the old road coming into the village. There's a new road now, and this road isn't used as a primary road, but the gas station was there, and that's important because I'm going to tell you about working in the gas station. Here's the laundry, and the laundry is a big operation with the hotels there, and I'll tell you about working in the laundry too. Lookout Studio, which is the Fred Harvey, or it was the Fred Harvey photo studio, and I'll tell you about working there. Here's the Bright Angel Lodge, which is right along the rim. And this is an aerial view of our house, the house that we lived in. It's not a very good picture, but I guess Google Earth doesn't do high resolutions of little towns like Grand Canyon. This is the house. I want you to notice the patio on the side, and here's the road, Navajo Drive, where we sled. This is now the community library, but at that time it was Louis Shellback's office and his laboratory. And Sally has something to tell you about the house. Talk up so they can hear.
Okay. So when we lived in that house, I thought my mother and father were the prince and princess of Grand Canyon. I thought they were beautiful people. They were exciting. We lived in a mansion. My mother wore gorgeous clothes all the time. My father was always in his suit, impeccable. Every day he went to work, and often on the weekends as well. And I just thought we lived in paradise. Big patio off to the back where there were wonderful parties of friends and neighbors in the community. And when my children had children of their own, we took them to Grand Canyon to reminisce with them throughout the village. And particularly, we drove by this house. And when we drove by it, I saw that it was open, and there were a couple of Navajo men repainting the interior of the home for the next occupants that were due shortly. So I asked if we could go in, and they said, of course. So I dragged my husband and our 2 children and their children into the house, having told them stories about my elegant parents. And we got into the house, and yes, there was a master bedroom with an ensuite bathroom there, but the bathroom you could hardly turn around in. It was so tiny. My mother's closet that I thought had probably housed all her elegant gowns was little more than a postage stamp. We went upstairs to the rooms where Paul and I grew up, and they were tiny little rooms upstairs, and a living room and a little dining room and a tiny kitchen and the beautiful patio off to the side. So I had to readjust some of my childhood memories about what that house was really like.
Now, then we showed you, you walk through the Pinon Pines and come to the hospital, and this was the hospital at that time, circa 1948. This is the front door of the hospital, which went nowhere. As you can see, they didn't even shovel the snow on the front steps because it went down to the main highway and nobody ever came in by the front door. Now, this is the staff at the time, 1951. And this picture has been used in a lot of information about the Conservancy because, of course, there's their building right behind. There's Leo. There's Mary Kuchua, who was the Hopi cook, who was there all the time, cooked for everybody. And the nurses, but I want to pick out this nurse particularly. Her name was Dorothy Winter. And then she married Bud Dunnigan, who was, he was a trail guide and ultimately became a sheriff, Coconino County Sheriff for Grand Canyon. But she had just left nursing school, was on her way to Hawaii, met my mother at the Bright Angel Lodge. My mother told her that Leo was looking for a nurse. She went over and talked to me, hired her, and she stayed there for the rest of her life. And she's still alive and she lives in Williams. And she worked as a nurse until she was 81. And she drives a sports car. And some of you may know her or may have seen her or run into her. Now, this is the side door of the hospital, which, as you can see it right here and right here. And that's really the main door that's used. That's where all the patients who come in a wheelchair come in, or patients come in for visits there. Patients come out of the hospital on the side view. So it's still used primarily by the Conservancy for their main entrance. And there's Leo there with his car and his shotgun, and he's not carrying a shotgun because it was dangerous, needed to protect the hospital. But he was a big hunter, and he used to take the shotgun to work with him, and after work go out outside the park and hunt a little bit. Now, there was a nursing home behind the hospital, and here's the nursing home behind the hospital. And this is Annie McGowan, who Dad hired from a friend as his secretary, and she stayed the secretary the whole time there and became a lifelong friend. You probably ought to explain what nursing home was at the time. It's different. Oh, yeah, okay, well, that's where the nurses lived. It wasn't a nursing home, it was a nurse's home. And I'm not sure what that building is used for, but this, if you'll see this area right here and this window, when I was working at Mayo, one of our PAs had been a park ranger, and he said he lived in that room where that window was. And at the time we were there, that was the operating room. So they just sort of reapportioned things. Grand Canyon got a lot of publicity from the Arizona Republic because it was Grand Canyon. The hospital got publicity. Here's an article about a lady who leaped off over the rim of the Grand Canyon but didn't die and was being taken care of. And there's Dorothy Winter Dunnigan taking x-rays because the nurses did a lot of that. Here's a picture of Dad, Leo, in one of his examining rooms examining a patient. And here's a picture of him seeing Edith Kolb Leonard. Now that's Emory Leonard's only child. That's Edith Kolb, and she married a ranger by the name of Carl Leonard. And she and my mother were born in the same year, and they were very close friends. So we had the opportunity to go over to Emory Kolb's house not infrequently for meals. And ultimately, as many people did when they retired from the Grand Canyon, they moved to Sedona, and she and her husband moved to Sedona. And I thought this was kind of interesting. This is a Christmas card she sent, and it's from Edith Leonard. And I had misspelled her name, but Barbara picked it up on her postcard, so we spelled it correctly. Now, this is a very important article that was in the Arizona Republic, June 1, 1952, and it was written by Lon Garrison, who was the vice superintendent of the park at that time. And there's a picture of the staff that you saw before. And obviously, I'm not going to read you this article, but I've taken some excerpts from it that are important. It said that the prepaid care was provided to employees of the Park Service, the Santa Fe Railroad, and the Fred Harvey. They prepaid so much to the hospital every year for the care of their people. So this was the first HMO before anybody had ever heard of an HMO. And when I gave a talk, when I was elected president of the Arizona Medical Association, HMOs were brand new. And I said, well, you know, they may be brand new, but back in the 40s, we had HMOs at Grand Canyon Hospital. Fee for service for tourists, so they had to pay or use their health insurance. The Park Service still owned the building. The Park Service did build a building. It was built in about 1931, I think. The Santa Fe provided the utilities, and Leo Schnur provided the medical care, the employees, and the food service. Now, the interesting thing about it was a tiny little hospital with 10 beds in it. The cost of a day in the hospital was $10, which Tom reminded me when we were rehearsing that was worth about $110 today, but that's still pretty cheap for a hospital room. But this little hospital was approved and certified by the AMA, by the Arizona Department of Health, and by the American Hospital Association. It was very unusual for small hospitals to have that kind of approval because they just didn't have the wherewithal to do all the things they had to do. But you could appreciate Leo had been the administrator of Indian hospitals for a number of years. And of course, they were government hospitals that had to meet government standards. So he knew how to put a hospital together. The hospital only ran about a 30% occupancy, but was in the black. And here's a picture of some people that many of you know that were born at the Grand Canyon Hospital. Now, not when we were there, not when Dad was the doctor there, but Steve Burkamp was born there, Susie Burkamp was born there, Mike, John Burkamp, Helen and Marvin Rowan, who lived up there and moved away. His father was with, I believe, with the maintenance. Now, Boo Burkamp's name is not down there, and we were told that when Mary Burkamp went into labor with Boo, that the doctor at the Grand Canyon Hospital had been drinking that day. So they took her to Flagstaff, and she was born in the Flagstaff Hospital. Okay, the Shrine of the Ages Chapel is kind of an important topic to talk about. At the time when Dad was there was no religious facility. The churches would hold services either in a home or a business. The Catholics would have Mass at the Bright Angel Lodge in one of their rooms in the Bright Angel Lodge. So a number of people got together, including Dad, John Burkamp, I think, were two of the big movers, Howard Strickland, who was important. And you'll see down here, this Father Faustina was the Catholic priest who would drive up from Williams to say Mass. And they got together with the idea to build a magnificent interdenominational church called the Shrine of the Ages Chapel at Grand Canyon, on the rim of Grand Canyon. Now, as an aside, Father Faustina, who became and stayed a lifelong friend, Father was a pilot and he had an airplane that used to fly all over. He married, when Barbara and I got married, we got married in Dallas, and I'm not Catholic and she is. And so Dad brought Father Faustina along as the Catholic priest to marry us so we could be married in the Catholic Church. And he married all three of our children. And he buried my mother and my father, and he buried Barbara's mother, and he baptized our oldest daughter in the chapel of the Holy Cross here in Sedona. So he was a real close family friend. Now, they decided that they wanted to put the church at a location in the canyon called the Shrine of the Ages. And it was called the Shrine of the Ages because Howard Pyle, who was governor at the time, would broadcast the Easter sunrise service every Easter from that point. And here's a picture of him broadcasting the Easter sunrise service. So they put together the plans. They presented to the Park Service. The Park Service approved it, and the plans were all put together here. The chapel would be right on the rim of the Grand Canyon, looking out over at the Shrine of the Ages location. Here's a view of it so you could see how it blends in and flows into the canyon. And you can imagine if you were sitting in the audience during one of the services, looking past the altar to the Grand Canyon. Well, as things will happen in the National Park Service, I'm looking it up. The Sierra Club found out about it and said, no way are you going to build a church on the rim of the Grand Canyon. So it wound up being this group's efforts against the Sierra Club. And you all know the power of the Sierra Club when it comes to the national parks. So it wasn't built on the rim of the Grand Canyon, and here it is. A little different from the pictures. It's in the park right across from the grocery store. But still, when Dad moved away from the Grand Canyon, they made him the president emeritus of the Shrine of the Ages Chapel Corporation, which was an honor that he really appreciated. The Grand Canyon Historical Society presents a Hall of Fame award for community service, and you'll see that Dad received this in 2009. And we're very proud that he did receive this from the Grand Canyon Historical Society. They were close friends of the Kolbs, as I told you, particularly their daughter. We were very much involved with the Verkamps. We did a lot of stuff with the Verkamps. As you know, the Verkamps lived on the second floor here. Their house was on the second floor, and this looked out over the Grand Canyon. So who could have a better place to live than have your front porch look out over the Grand Canyon? That building now, I'm sure you know, is no longer a gift shop and a handicraft shop. It's a bookstore and a historic center. Okay, so what did we do at the Grand Canyon as kids? Well, Boy Scouts were big, and I'll talk a little bit more about Boy Scouts. Skiing in the wintertime was something that we were all involved in. We could cross-country ski. And by the way, there was always a lot more snow up there then than there is now. You could, from November till probably the end of March, the ground was always covered with snow. And now you can go up there in the wintertime and not often find no snow at all. But we would do cross-country skiing. There was a ski run in Williams that we would go to, and we go to the one in Flagstaff. The young adult social life was active. There was a community center. There were dances there. The Bright Angel Lodge would have a band on Saturday night, and the tourist girls would come in to the dance, and so the local fellows would have an opportunity to meet somebody and dance with somebody. Sally, you want to say anything about the social life?
No, just that it was lots of fun, and there was also a theater there, as I recall.
Yeah, twice a week they had a movie.
Right, and so I would tag along with my big brother, much to his chagrin, and go to the movies, and they'd make me sit behind them in the theater, but they did let me go with them. So that was one of the highlights, I think, for us too.
But the Boy Scouts were very active, and here's a picture of me receiving my first class merit badge, or my first class badge from Shellback, from Louis Shellback, and there's my dad in the background with a big proud smile on it. So we did a lot. We did a lot of hiking. We hiked down in the Grand Canyon a lot. In those days, you didn't need to get a permit to go into the canyon. You go in anytime you want to, and you sort of camped any place you wanted to. And so that was active. We would camp, we would hike down to Havasupai. And here's another newspaper article, and I'm going to talk a little bit about these newspaper articles, but here's a newspaper article that came up that said Paul Schnur, son of Leo Schnur, is off on a trip to Valley Forge for scouting jamboree, and that he would be taken down for training at the Herd Pueblo, which I think was a herd museum, and that we would leave Phoenix by train, go to Chicago, Niagara Falls, New York City, and on to Valley Forge, which was really quite a trip for the Boy Scouts to take. Now, this was our home, this home that Sally was talking about inside. This was the home, inside of the home during the Christmas. These were the Christmas cards. And you can see there's Leo would stuff some of the birds that he liked to shoot. And as you can see, the fireplace leaked a little bit. And these are pictures as we were growing up from the living room. And there's what that Sally is the dining room, the big, huge, gorgeous dining room you were talking about. Now, in the wintertime, there was not a lot to do at the Grand Canyon. There were not a lot of people. And if we weren't in grade school, we were gone to high school. But a lot of partying went along. And I think Sally will tell you that a lot of partying went on. So here's a picture of one of the parties. And we don't know who's in the front row. We think that this may have been at the Altavar, and these may have been Fred Harvey dignitaries. But in the back row, we have We have Jack Verkamp. And then here's Dorothy Dunnigan. She's the nurse, Leo's nurse, and she was always involved in the party. And this is Dolly Gibson. And Dolly Gibson was the wife of the photographer who I'm sure took this picture. And there was Mary Verkamp, who was always life of the party. And here's another picture of another party. This one, that's the Bright Angel manager. So here you can see that they're partying again. There's Jack Verkamp, there's Mary Verkamp, there's Dad, there's Mother. I'm not sure what she's telling the administrator of the Bright Angel, but here is Dolly, and here are two other Verkamps. That's Muzz and Peggy. Muzz was the mother of Jack and Peggy Verkamp. And another activity was riding the mules down the canyon. Here we are with the whole family. There's Dad. There I am. There's my mother. There's Sally, and there's our guide. And we're riding down on mules to the canyon, which we did several times. And here we are accompanied on the same trail by the same photographer with Teddy Roosevelt. So I like to say, here's me and Teddy Roosevelt riding down the Grand Canyon together.
And that's the classic photograph of a trip down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, because the camera was from Cole.
It was from a Cole studio out a window.
And so they took a picture of every trip that went down.
Every mule trip that went down. And in the early days, I'm sure many of you know, they didn't have water or darkroom, so they would take the negatives and run down to Indian Gardens, develop them, print them, run back up, and when the mules came back up, they had them there to sell, which is an incredible story. Well, here's Phantom Ranch. Phantom Ranch was always a wonderful place to visit. And here's the great swimming pool. For those of us who had an opportunity to use a swimming pool, it's, as you know, it's no longer there. It was not really a swimming pool. It was just a hole where the water from the Bright Angel Creek ran in. You'll see the water coming in from the Bright Angel Creek up here. So there was no filter, there was no chlorine, there was no salt. It was just creek water that ran into the swimming pool and ran out, but it was really refreshing after hiking down there. When we were young, it was the pool that was refreshing. When we got a little bit older, it was the beer that was refreshing. It was the coldest beer you ever tasted. Okay, and Sally, this is pictures of Sally at our home. Leo was big on home movies, and we have lots of home movies. And here is Sally out on that patio that we showed you at the house. And you want to say anything about your friends here?
Sure, the girl on my right is Karen Garrison, and I guess her dad was the assistant
administrator.
administrator. And the other girl is Ellen Jean Christensen. They were both my BFFs of the time. And we were trying to remember what Ellen Jean's father did. And I think he was probably a naturalist, maybe with Louis Shellback. But they lived right up the hill from us, so we spent lots of time together. You see the pine forest behind me, the pinyon pine forest behind me when I'm on that little patio by our house. And one of my most favorite memories was scavenging that forest in the fall when the pine cones were filled with beautiful pinon nuts bursting with juicy piñons, and we would be out there picking up piñons or taking the pine cones and getting the nuts out of them. And then Dad perfected the art of roasting them, which he taught me. And the other art he perfected was that of stuffing one cheek filled with the pine nuts. And he was able to crack the pine nuts in his mouth, spit the seeds out, and eat the good pine nut, leaving all the rest of them in his cheek for the next bite. And I spent hours trying to perfect that and be as good at it as he was.
Okay, we're going to talk about the railroad, because the railroad played a very, very important part in Grand Canyon, still does. But this book called The Grand Canyon of Arizona, and you'll see it's published by the Passenger Department of the Santa Fe Railroad. And this book was published in 1906. When Barbara and I first moved into Sagewood, where we live in Phoenix now in a retirement community, our neighbor came over and brought this book to me and said, you know, I've had this book for a long time, and you've been related to the Grand Canyon. Is there any way that somebody up at the Grand Canyon would like to have this book? And I was so excited. I said, yes, the Grand Canyon Historical Society would love to have that book, and I'll take it. And I was so excited about having the book that she decided to keep it. And so I was really I made copies of everything. I copied it. And then I went on Amazon and I found a copy of it for $15. So I ordered it and I have a copy of it. I looked just the other day on Amazon and they still have it. They still have some of them on Amazon, but they're over $100 now. You can see on this one over here, there's a Santa Fe with the Altovar in the background. But the interesting thing about this book, if those of you who know your history of the railroad know that the first train came into the Grand Canyon in 1901. And that's shortly after that when the Altovar opened. But this book was actually first published in 1902. So it predated this 1906 one, and this was the cover of it. And I looked online for that, and you can't find one, but there's one up for auction in a antique auction show, and they didn't say how much they were going to auction it for, but it was going to be auctioned off. Well, in this, a couple of things that are interested in this. Here is an article written in that book that was in 1902, and you can imagine not a lot of people have visited the Grand Canyon in 1902. This is the second vice president and general manager of the trunk railway system, and he says that all he could think of when he sees the Grand Canyon is "Near, my God, to thee." He says, "I have seen many wonders of the world, both natural and artificial. St. Peter's in Rome, Mount Blanc, the Matterhorn, magnificent scenery of the Rhine." Can you imagine in 1902, he'd been to all these places? The beauties of Ireland, not forgetting Lake Killarney, the lovely gardens of England, the roaring Atlantic, Niagara Falls, but all sink into insignificance compared with the wonderful majesty of the Grand Canyon. If you have any desire to know the Grand Canyon, rely neither on poet or writer, but see it with your own eyes. And so that was kind of interesting, but this one here is more interesting. This is an original article written by J. Wesley Powell. And if you can imagine, J. Wesley Powell had died in 1902. So when this book was in preparation, they asked him to write a first-person story of his life and travels in the Grand Canyon. There's a picture of him with his long beard. But he wrote this story and it was published both in the first edition and the second edition. So that was pretty exciting. Now, the Grand Canyon Railroad Station, I have to tell you my story. When I was in grade school, I had to wear braces because I had crooked teeth. And I had to wear braces because I wore crooked teeth. And there was no orthodontist in Northern Arizona, so they took me to Phoenix and got braces put on. And then after they were put on, the orthodontist said, "Well, you got to come in every 2 weeks to get your braces tightened." Well, you know, in those days, it was a long way from Grand Canyon to Phoenix without any interstates. And so my mother and dad decided that I would take the train. So every 2 weeks, I would go down and I'd leave the Grand Canyon Railroad Station at 8 o'clock at night and go to Phoenix by myself. And Tom said to remind you that I was about 12 years old. And so I would get on the train at Grand Canyon and the train would go to Williams. And I'd get off the train at Williams because I'm on the main line now. And I would have to get from Williams to Ash Fork. So I would catch the Super Chief, usually that were coming through, they came through regularly. And I would go to Ash Fork, a total of 30 miles. And the train going to Phoenix was usually parked in the railway station, but it didn't leave till 3 o'clock in the morning. So I would get on board the train and go to sleep on a bench. And then when the train would leave, I'd go to Grand Canyon. And I'd go to Phoenix, and Sally reminded me, then I would take a bus. I think the train got at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'd take a bus to downtown Phoenix, wait till the dentist office opened, get my teeth tightened, go to 2 double features, one at the Orpheum and one at the Fox, take the bus back to the train station and return to Grand Canyon. So I did that every 2 weeks for 2 years. Oh, and the only reason why I could do that was because since the railroad had a contract with my dad to provide prepaid medical care, they gave us a free pass on the railroad. All right, now let's talk a little bit about the grammar schools. There was no high school, as Tom said, at Grand Canyon, and there was one later on, but the time we were there was no high schools, and most of the national parks did not have high schools. So Wasatch Academy was a Presbyterian school in the middle of a little tiny town in the center of Utah that was 100% Mormon. But it was a good school. It was a boarding school, and it was relatively inexpensive. And we talked about working, and maybe we'll get Sally to tell you a little bit about what we had to do to be there to help defer the costs. But we would go to Wasatch, and there would be kids from Yosemite, from Yellowstone, from Glacier, even from Hawaii. And later on, there was a high school started at the Grand Canyon, but it was after we had gone. Now here is the first yearbook of the Grand Canyon School. And you see my name's down at the bottom, so I ordered a special edition. Okay, here is the first and second grade class. There were 2 classes in each room. And some people you might notice, there's Mike Verkamp, there's Steve Verkamp, and here's Harley and Charlie Marcus. Now they're hard to see there, but these 2 little faces there, and that's the teacher behind them. They were identical twins, and they were born, but lived their whole life up to the first grade in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Their parents ran the gauging station at Phantom Ranch. Remember last month we talked about the gauging stations, but they ran the gauging stations. So as soon as these 2 boys were born, they spent the life until they were 6 years old in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Then when they were ready to go to school, their mother moved up to the rim and brought them to school, but neither one of them spoke English. They spoke a language that they had invented, and nobody but their mother understood this language. And so they had to start from scratch. And I'm told that that's not unusual for identical twins to make up their own language. Now, here we are in the 3rd and 4th grade, and there's Sally, and there's John Verkamp. And here is the 7th and 8th grade, and there I am right here. And I'm going to show you next. This was our graduating class the next year. This was 1950, and there were 8 graduates in the class. That's Mrs. Heitmeyer, the teacher. This is David Cunningham, who you could see was the tallest. He went to Wasatch and became a basketball player. And ultimately, after graduating, after playing basketball for Northern Arizona University, he was the basketball coach and the athletic director at Kingman High School for the rest of his life. This is John Bunnell, and I'm going to show you a little bit more about John Bunnell, but his father ran the White Hogan silversmith, the White Hogan Indian jewelry store. And it was a Grand Canyon, but it then moved down to Scottsdale, and he went down and spent the rest of his life down there. This is Lorraine Heberling, and I really don't know a lot about her. She did go to Wasatch, but I didn't follow up on her. This is Ray May. He went to Wasatch, but I haven't followed up on him. This is Marvin Rowan, whose picture I showed you, who moved away and has been living in the Midwest. Here I am, and here's Philip Weeks, who was my best friend. Philip and I graduated from 8th grade together. We graduated from high school together. We graduated from college together, and he was the best man in my wedding. I was the best man in his wedding. And here he is. He became a prominent lawyer in Phoenix after going to law school when I went to medical school. Yeah. This is Sherma Moore. And Sherma Moore she went to Wasatch, and she went on to become the first female national park superintendent. Her father was involved in the park services, so she holds the title of the first woman to be a superintendent in the national park. Here was Sally's graduating class. So at Wasatch, we went up there. Wasatch was a typical school, even though it was a boarding school. Here's another article from the newspaper saying Dr. and Mrs. Leo Schnur's son, junior at Wasatch Academy, made the varsity football team. So I'm going to tell you more about these newspaper articles if we have time. But I just have to tell you, I've quoted them as we've gone along. And my daughter, Polly, says, well, after all, they were the social media of the time. And actually, if you go in and look at the Williams newspaper, you can find out who your mother entertained and what she served and who was there and what china she used and when she went to Flagstaff shopping. And I'll show you some more about that if we have time. Now here's the Grand Canyon School. It still looks, I think, pretty much alike today. to get to Wasatch, you'll see there we were at Grand Canyon, and our parents would take us up to Cameron and put us on a bus about 11 o'clock at night, Sally. And 12 hours later, we'd arrive in Mount Pleasant, Utah, 423 miles. And we would go up in the fall, we'd come home for Thanksgiving, we'd come home for Christmas. And I did find, Sally, where we'd come home for spring break and then come home at the end of the year. So you can imagine, we were pretty tired of Greyhound buses. And there's Wasatch Academy. You can see the Wasatch Mountains up here. Here is the school. It's around the football field. That was the women's dorm, right? And these two were the men's dorm, and this was the main school building. And tell them what we would have to do in way of working while we were there.
So our tuition was very moderate for a boarding school of any time, I suppose. But the reason it was is because this school really catered to the Park Service children, the Indian Service children, and the ranchers in Montana and Wyoming. And the reason they could keep the prices low is because we did the work. As students, we did the work. We waited on tables, we washed dishes, I cleaned toilets for the teachers, we swept and mopped and ate as fast as we could so we could get out of there and get our work done and get to class on time. And I still eat way too fast, and I know it's all Wasatch's fault.
Okay, we're running a little low on time, and so, but one of the very important parts for the jobs, I'm going to run through these a little fast, but Tom said that he'd give us a few extra minutes if we needed to. Delivering newspapers was one of the first jobs I had, and it was very different because they didn't bring newspapers to the paper boy. The newspaper deliverer would have to go to the Bright Angel gift shop and wait for the bus to come in from Phoenix, which was usually in the middle of the afternoon. They would bring the newspapers that were sold in the gift shop. As a newspaper boy, we would then buy the newspapers, retail, deliver them, and add some on to make our money, and then we would pass the job on. One of the next jobs was setting bowling pins at Rowell that I'll talk a little bit about. I folded sheets at the Fred Harvey Laundry and decided I did not want to get into the laundry business. I pumped gas at the Fred Harvey gas station that I showed you, but probably one of the main jobs I had was assisting Virgil Gibson, who was the photographer for Fred Harvey. And for 2 years, for 2 summers, I managed a lodge on the rim of the Grand Canyon. It was not in the park. It was on a mining claim. And then finally, I worked as a bellhop at Bright Angel Lodge. Now, in setting pins at Rowell, Rowell was a bar that was just outside the park, and they had a bowling alley that didn't have pin setters, so they'd have to hire kids to set pins, and you had to be careful because the people throwing the balls sometimes had a little too much to drink, and they might throw them while you were down there setting pins, so you had to be prepared to get out. One day, I went into the bar. They had a big bar and dance room, and there was some commotion going in there, and there was a cowboy at the bar who couldn't make his bar bill. And the bartender said he couldn't leave until he paid his bar bill, which was $25. So he said he had a car outside that he'd sell for $25. And this is what it was. It was a Buick. It was a 1936 Buick Roadmaster, not in the condition this one is in. It was in pretty lousy condition. I had $25 in my pocket, so I bought it and drove it home. And when I got home, my mother said, "Oh my God, you didn't buy that. When your dad gets home and he was out of town, you're in for big trouble." Well, I was. And my dad was not happy that I had spent $25 on this old piece of junk. And finally, he said I could keep it, but I have to pay for the maintenance on it. And the tires were completely bald. And I checked out the price of the tires. And this was way back in the 40s, and they were $200 a tire. So obviously, I sold the car right away. Okay, I worked for Virgil Gibson in the Lookout Studio. I used to develop photographs for the tourists at night, and then they say we'd have them the next day. This is the camera that I had. You can see it's a Speed Graphic. It's a huge, huge camera. Virgil gave that to me, and I used that camera until I went in the Army, went to Germany, and bought a nice little Rolleiflex. But this was what the press photographers would use, and it was quite a camera, but it was a lot to deal with. Here are pictures that Virgil took over the years. These were all his pictures. There's, of course, Cathedral Rock. There's Easter Sunrise Service with Governor Powell. He used to come to Sedona a lot to visit, and this was the creek right behind our house in Sedona. And there's Hopi Sammy, that picture you see a lot Virgil took. He colored all these because all of his pictures were in black and white, but somebody said, why didn't he color Sammy? And I guess probably there were too many colors in his head bonnet. Okay, then one of the advantages of being there was working with Virgil. We got a call one day saying that there was a dignitary coming in. They didn't want anybody to know he was there, but they did want pictures of him. So Virgil and I went down, and the superintendent of the park was down there, and it turned out to be General Eisenhower. It was before he was President of the United States. So I had a chance to take a picture of General Eisenhower, and Barbara tells me that she saw that picture in an Arizona highways with my credit, and I don't remember getting it in there. Okay, then one of the main jobs that I had, there was a lodge on the West Rim, and it was called Rogers Place because it was owned by Will Rogers Jr. And John Bennell, who owned the White Hogan Silver, was the manager of that. And it was on a mining claim. And so some friends of my mother and father bought it and remodeled it. And as a junior in high school, made me the manager of it. It was, they had a bar in there, and I wasn't old enough to go in the bar, but I was managing the bar. And I would hire fellow employees from Wasatch to come down and take care of things in the as desk clerks and servers. And it actually wound up having a swimming pool. They built a swimming pool later on, but it's the only swimming pool on the rim of the Grand Canyon. It was eventually sold and called the Grand Canyon Inn. And then the mining claim that it was on, I thought was copper, but somebody took a Geiger counter down and found out it wasn't copper, it was uranium. So they tore the building down and isolated it. And there was a uranium mine there for a long, long time that took a lot of uranium out. But if you go there now, it's all cordoned off and you're not allowed to go there because of the uranium. Another part of running that was in the Arizona highways. And this was an article that Barbara found. It said Red Harvey usually filled for the whole summer, recalls Paul Schnur too. For 2 summers, Schnur managed Kachina Lodge, built on a privately owned mining claim near Grand Canyon Village. He remembered tourists showing up hungry and frantic with kids and without reservations. So we built tents and rented the tents out for people who didn't have a place to stay. Now, this is a story that I'm going to go through real quick. When I was a bellhop at the Bright Angel Lodge, one Sunday, Byron Harvey, who was the son of Fred Harvey and the president of Fred Harvey, was coming to visit. And he was coming to visit the Bright Angel Lodge. And so Hopi Sammy was there, and the manager was there. All the important people were there. And Byron Harvey was a stickler on having immaculately clean bathrooms. So as soon as we arrived, he said to Sammy, take me to the men's bathroom. So we all followed him into the men's bathroom, knowing that he wasn't going there to go to the bathroom. He wanted to check it out. There was a lot of copper in the bathroom, and the bathroom was immaculate, and he lauded Sammy for what a wonderful job he did and how great it was and how pleased he was. And Sammy answered him by saying, Mr. Harvey, I'm mad at you. And Mr. Harvey sort of looked a little bit dismayed and said, Sammy, why are you mad at me? He said, because you come to visit on Sunday, and Sunday's my day off, and the boss man says I have to come and clean the bathrooms for you. Well, Mr. Harvey took that in good manner, and everything turned out. Also, I was working at the Grand Canyon when the midair collision occurred in 1956. I was a bellhop at the Bright Angel. And the media descended on Grand Canyon. And of course, there was no transportation for the media because the media, there were Harvey buses and there were cars that were used for transportation, but there were no rental cars and there were no taxis. And so, the headquarters for the investigation was at an airport about 10 miles south of the village. And so the media was crazy about getting out there so they could cover it because they didn't have any transportation. So I had a car, and I did very well when I was off duty running people back and forth and made a lot of money. Barbara and I then attended the commemoration in 2014, making it a National Historic Landmark. There were 128 people killed in this, and some are buried at Grand Canyon, some are buried at Flagstaff. This is the site on the rim where this plaque is, and here's the superintendent providing that. Now, I'm going to talk real quick, with time running short, about newspapers. Now, there's a subscription called newspapers.com, and it's a paid subscription, but it's got millions of newspapers, and they're all categorized so you can put a name in and find them. And if you put the names in of anybody you know at the Grand Canyon, you're overwhelmed with a number of articles, because the little Williams newspaper and the Flagstaff newspaper and even the Phoenix newspaper would write up all these things that went on at Grand Canyon. And these are just a few of them that I'm going to go through real quick. And this is one about how Leo Schnur arrived from Fort Yates to take over the Grand Canyon Hospital with his kids. Here's one about, this is Grand Canyon folks at business points. And this is an article saying Mike Strickland was working at Babbitt's store. Let's see, Sammy Turner was working at the Bright Angel Curio Shop. Paul Schnur was employed at Kachina Lodge. Ray May was working for the Santa Fe, and Buddy Weeks, who's Phil Weeks, my best friend, was working at Verkamps. And then they go on to talk about all of the awards we got in Wasatch, and the 4 who graduated, big details about. And then here's Mrs. Leo Schnur and her daughter Sally left Friday by train to go visit Mrs. Pike Sullivan in Chicago. So that's part of the newspaper. This is interesting. I just found this. This is a picnic party at Rowell, you know, where I told you where we did the bowling. That was outside the park, and it was a big bar there. It was a big cowboy hangout bar. And the Barringtons are the ones who bought Kachina Lodge. And I didn't realize this until I found this newspaper, but they also bought Rowell and put on a big party at Rowell. Well, here's an article about Bill Youngren, who was my cousin, coming to visit and going to work at the Bright Angel Lodge. And here's Paul Schnur as a freshman at the university, coming home on Easter vacation. And there's Mr. and Mrs. Louis Shellback and their son Preston made a business trip to Flagstaff. So that's social media. But the news, this newspaper.com is unbelievable for things you can find in, things you never even believed you could find. Okay, well, Thomas Wolfe wrote, "You can never go home again." Perhaps you can. And Grand Canyon Village is a very special place to go home to, because it's not like any other small town in this country. In most small towns, there are people who are there for generations. There are families there, they're farmers, they own businesses there, they own restaurants there. So when you go back, when you've been gone, you can reconnect with people. But you can't do that at Grand Canyon Village, because there's nobody there who was there when you were there, because nobody stays. Nobody owns property there. Nobody owns a house there. They come, they work, and they leave. So it's very unusual to go back to Grand Canyon like you're going back to visit your home. But because of gatherings like Grand Canyon History Symposium, I traveled back in time through my research and reconnected with old friends and had a really wonderful time doing that. And I hope I've shared some of that with you. The article that I've just told you about has been written up in the reflection of the Grand Canyon story, but I have expanded it, and we're fortunate to have Sally here to help. So I think with that, I'm going to stop the share and apologize for running over time, and have any questions.
That was lovely, Paul. Thank you so very, very much for that.
It's gotten dark here, so you can.
It has, and that there's no problems with that. I had a question for you. You mentioned Louis Shellbach, and his museum collection was not too far from your house.
Correct.
Can you describe what that looked like when you walked in the door? Do you remember?
Sally, do you remember? I can remember going over. Louis was a real mentor to us because he really liked teaching kids. But when you went in there, there were shelves and shelves of butterflies. There were trays of animals and bugs. There were rocks, there were rock collections, almost anything you could think of was there.
Hmm.
And if you'd ask Louis, he'd tell you all about it.
Nice. Was that a wooden building?
You know, I can't remember. To me, it was a building. I was a kid and I don't remember what the building was like.
Okay. It's probably still there. I
yeah.
have to go check it out.
There's a comment in the chat room that you might want to read, Paul.
It says, "Thank you, Uncle Paul." And hang on a second, the comment just took off. It says, "Thank you, Uncle Paul, Aunt Barbara, and Mom."
And the one,
Well, there's one above from Rosalind Turnbull says, "Did you know the postmaster, Art Metzger? He was my husband's uncle. We spent a lot of time in the Grand Canyon in the 60s and 70s. Sherma Moore was a good friend of Art's. Marcus and Art motorcycled to the Grand Canyon in the spring of 1913. And Marcus stayed and did carpentry work for W.W. Bass and filed on a homestead on Coconino Wash on 160 acres. He knew and worked with Stanford Rowe." Does that ring a bell with you guys?
Oh, yeah, he was a postmaster, but he also was a Boy Scout leader.
Okay,
So we spent a lot of time with him because he arranged the Boy Scout activities. He led the hikes. We went down the canyon with him. We went Supai with him. We did cookouts. I remember he would take us out and we'd all have to cook a meal, and the meals were usually terrible, but he could usually somehow garner enough food out to feed the people that were there. No, he was a very dear friend and a great Boy Scout supporter.
do you have a quick story about him?
Oh, gosh. Sally, do you? No, I can't. I mean, I can just remember all of the hiking we did with him, but and the fact that he worked at the post office, so you'd see him when you were going in there. But I don't have any specific stories.
No
I mean,
worries.
I can tell the stories that I can remember going hiking out. We hiked right outside the park near Tusayan, and it was to fix dinners. And Phil Weeks was going to fix the first dinner, and he had the menu, and Art had helped him with the menu, and he cooked it, and it was totally unedible. It was either burned or it was just unbelievable. But he had some stuff in his backpack that at least would have something to eat. Candy bar.
Nice.
Candy bar, Sally said.
Aunt Robin says, "Hi, Dr. Schnur," from Robin and Howard. "We lived at 7 Boulder Street and was the Mayo person who lived at the hospital. And thank you for taking care of Miriam by stitching her up many years ago."
Small world, huh?
Yeah. Sharon Coates knows that though she grew up on the West Coast, your Grand Canyon experience reminded her of kinder, gentler times. Love the newspaper clippings versus what appears today on Facebook. Thanks for sharing your memories.
Right.
And a Zoom user wants to know, can you tell the story of playing with the uranium bricks, the yellow cake?
Well, I could just tell the story that when this mine, when the claim, there were a lot of mining claims, most of which nobody was interested in mining them. They were just interested in having the property for some reason, like Cameron and the Colbs and all those folks. But this mining claim they thought was copper because there was this yellow stuff in there, but they never did anything about it. And then somebody took a Geiger counter in there and it was uranium, and it was high grade uranium, and there were lots and lots and lots of it. And all of us that lived on top of it for that time, most of us are still alive that I know of. But now if you go up there, I don't know, I haven't been there recently, but they tore the building down. They put a big fence around it with big signs, with the radiation, no entry signs on there to go, don't go in there. But then when I was in grade school, before we came to Grand Canyon, I lived at Tuba City, and I went to a high school at Tuba City that was, they divide, not a high school, a grade school. They divided the schools between Indians and whites. So Indian schools were large, the white schools had very few people. Now it's a torn down building sitting around a big fence, And the reason why they don't tear it down is because it's filled with asbestos. So I've been through asbestos and I've been through uranium, and I'm 86 years old and I'm still here.
We're glad you are. At this point, if anyone has any questions, please unmute yourself, and you've got Paul here and Sally. And
Hi, Paul. This is Carolyn Gibson,
Hi,
Virgil
Carol.
Gibson's daughter, and my
Yes.
brother John's here. And John was delivered by your dad at the Grand Canyon Hospital. And Dorothy Dunnigan happened to be at the service station, smelled the ether, and ran back up to the hospital to help deliver him.
That's a great. Yeah, that is a great story. Uh-huh.
Wonderful.
Things were
Hi,
done
Dr.
with-
Schnur. It's Howie Asaki here.
Oh, hi. How
Hi
are you?
there. Doing well. So I'm the guy who lived at the in the hospital building when it was the YACC,
Right.
Young Adult Conservation Corps,
You lived in
building.
the operating room.
in the operating room, right? So many happy memories there, hiking around and
Well, and I got
enjoying.
you on the board of the Grand Canyon Historical Society, and thank you for your service. You spent a lot of time on the board.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for getting me involved. Loved it.
Great.
Glad you're back.
Thank you. Good to hear from you.
Yeah. Doing well.
Where are you? Are you in Phoenix?
Yeah. Scottsdale,
Very good.
and recently retired from Mayo.
Right. Like me.
Yes. Yeah.
I wasn't recent. I was a little bit longer ago than that.
And we lived right next to the school when he was a ranger on 7 Boulder Street.
Uh-huh.
And then I don't know if you remember, you were on your way on a vacation, and Howard called you to come stitch up our daughter, and you stopped by the hospital,
Yep.
stitched her up, and went on to Hawaii. We thank you for that very
Yes. She has a beautiful forehead.
Good. Good. Good to hear
much. Thank
that.
you for your presentation. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for attending.
Dr. Schnur,
Yes.
it's Julie Hillard. I just wanted to say thanks for including the emeritus staff in this. This was wonderful.
Good. I hope we did get some emeritus staff. Tom, I stuck around a little bit and I told Julie Hilliard, who's the administrator for the Mayo emeritus staff, to give them the link. And we also gave it to the folks at Sagewood, so they had a chance to tune in. And some of them couldn't make it, so they want to link to the recording.
I
excellent.
do see a few of our members on here, so I know some of us really enjoyed it. Thank you
Great.
again.
Thank you, Julie.
Hi, Uncle Paul. It's Marina, Teresa, and Steve. And we just want to say thank you so much. That was a really awesome presentation. And nice to see you. And hi, Amma. That was awesome. Thank
Hi,
you. Love you.
darling.
So you're home. I didn't know she was home.
Yeah.
Wow, you're back from Thailand. Welcome back from Thailand. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you. Happy to be back.
Nice, Steve.
No, can't talk. We're all crying. So, but thank you so much. That was awesome.
I think the fellow you just saw, Steve, who is Sally's son, he went to Wasatch also. So we carried on the tradition.
Yep. Thank you very much for getting me there. Class 82. Loved it. Every minute of it.
And you're still crying.
Yeah, yeah.
He is.
Steve's the sentimental one in our family.
Yes. Thank you, guys. That was wonderful.
Thanks.
Hi, this is Mickey White, and your father sewed up my head and after being beaten by a rock, looking at the helicopters going to the airplane crash in 1956. So I was actually a patient at the old hospital, and we actually did go up the front steps back then to the waiting room.
Oh, my God.
And I eventually lived in the old hospital across from the surgery after the year that it closed, and then the new hospital opened. And then I also lived in the old nurses' dorm
Oh,
too. And the answer to the question.
you know what that is now? What the old nurses' dorm is now?
Okay, a couple of years ago, I was there, and they have some sort of accounting thing going on there. is what
okay.
one of the Grand Canyon Conservancy people told me.
Okay.
That, but it's, you know, it's still there. And I loved your presentation. It was so well done. Oh, to answer Tom's question about Louis Shellback, it was called the Naturalist Workshop. And when it was a wooden building, it's still a wooden building because it's still there.
Thank you.
And you'd walk in and there would be like a little entryway lobby because like I said, it's a naturalist workshop. So that's where the interpretive people were. So tourists could come in there. And then some of you know Louise Hinchcliffe, she would be there. And then in the back part was the collections.
And Michael, what was your position at the park? How did you, what did your parents do there?
Well, okay, I started going there in 1954. My father was actually a seasonal ranger, and Louis Shellback hired him. And Louise was, you know, Louise Hinchcliffe was very important. And then I stayed there every summer till 1970. So I was, one thing I bet you folks remember, the recreation program at the school during the summer. There was always a recreation program at the school during the summer that the kids did. And I actually taught arts and crafts there, which was a joke when I was 15. And I worked for Fred Harvey in the Park Service and stuff. So, but thank you for such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi, this is Susie.
Oh, hi, Susie.
Hey, Susie.
I just wanted to say hello and send love to the Schnurs and all the extended, the Foresters too. And, you know, I loved the summer recreation program, and you probably taught me how to like braid lanyard, Michael.
That's exactly.
You know, but I do remember those. That was a wonderful part of summer. And
Yeah.
it's nice to hear from you, Carolyn, too. And yeah, just to have this little group of old timer locals, and then all the new people who love and appreciate the village and the park. It's really, really lovely. A lot of fun. Thank you.
Are you still in town, Susie?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
I am. But now I'm totally motivated to get over there and see you.
Yeah. we'd want you to.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Good to talk with you. Is that it?
You know, it is. But I just had a thought. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Susie and Mike and you and Sally and Caroline, maybe we could do a virtual outing one time and just sit back and let you all talk.
You might be sorry. Those are wild stories.
You know, it would be better just get us all to come up to Grand Canyon.
Well, if we could get a little camera there and run it out to the people in Zoom land.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, it's just a thought. Well, this has just been a real treat. Paul and Sally, thank you so very much, and everyone else who participated. It's been a lovely evening. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I think with that, we will go ahead and close down this Zoom presentation. I once again like to thank Sally and Paul for this presentation tonight. And if you have a presentation, I was thinking like Carolyn, if you do a presentation on your father, Virgil, I think that would be stunning.
Oh, I think it would be great. You know, I wanted to do something with Virgil because, you know, in a way he's been forgotten, and it would really be nice to do a showing in Kolb Studio of all the pictures we could collect. I got a bunch of his pictures, and I'm sure his kids do too.
You bet. You bet. I think that would be stunning. Again, if that's something that you're willing to do, it'd be awesome. And you know, of course, Susie Verkamp, I'm always like, would you be willing to do
Absolutely.
one of these virtual outings? And Michael, you know, you as well. So thank you all for coming out tonight. We'll hope to see you all in a month when Kern Nuttall will be speaking about the Lee's Ferry Cemetery. Hope you're all members of the Grand Canyon Historical Society, and you all have a good evening. Thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.